let's talk a little bit about some of the things that you've been working on at our organization, right? Daily News. Correct me if I'm wrong, but I don't think you've ever had a month to spend photographing something here necessarily, right?
Well, the last story that we're going to look at tonight, Admiral, we spent close to a month.
Okay.
Courtney and I did, I think. We went back maybe 4 or 5 times, but it's true. It's time is valuable, not just to me as a journalist, because it allows me to build trust and allows me to take my stories further, allows me to get closer to my subjects, but it's also valuable to my editor and the managers, and they don't want to send me off on month-long expeditions to salvage yards and things like that. So,
right, of course. So these are some images from a demonstration protest in Logan Square after the death of Adam Toledo. Why I wanted to show these pictures is because I wanted to talk a little bit about how you create a sense of space for somebody who doesn't exist anymore, right? And I think, I wanted to know a little bit more about your experience of like shooting this, right? This was in Logan Square, it wasn't in Little Village. Did that make a difference for you, not being exactly there, but what did you feel in the city when that was happening?
Yeah, this came on the heels of a lot of the protests that happened over the summer, the George Floyd protests and the Black Lives Matter demonstrations. And you're right, I mean, obviously in this situation, Adam was a 13-year-old boy. If you don't know his story, he was shot during a pursuit, and he died in his neighborhood of Little Village. And there was a palpable trauma that occurred, all throughout that summer, but there was a palpable trauma that occurred in that neighborhood when Adam passed away. And when the body cam was released later on, I think it really ignited a movement to talk about, how Black and brown children, what their interactions are with officers in the city. And so this demonstration occurred in Logan Square, and I obviously, one of the things that I think about a lot when I go to these things is that there is a sensitivity. Regardless of how you feel about the outcome of the situation, there's a trauma that occurred there. And so as a photographer, I have to be sensitive about how I photograph it. And I want to bring Adam to life in a way that helps to tell his story, but obviously him not being there, using the signage, figuring out how I can best tap into what's going on in front of me. These events are really chaotic. There's about 100 things going on at once. And it's difficult to know where to focus. And so, after doing this for almost 20 years, you start to slowly figure out how to really tune into the moments and the things that help to best tell the story and to kind of take our audience to those places that we get access to.
What really, as I was getting ready for this, I was looking at the dates of everything when things happened, and this was last year. Yeah. And to me, that it just completely blows my mind that, like, you talk about that summer, that was last summer,
yeah.
Right? It was like spring of last year that this was going on, right?
That's right.
Yeah.
And it, you'll see some photographs later on, I think actually after this section, where it's during the teacher strike and nobody's wearing masks. And it's almost like unfathomable in the society that we live in today to think about all of those people gathering together. Nobody's wearing a mask. Nobody knows about COVID. I mean, parents were losing their minds because they had to keep their kids home from school for a month. And then that was the precursor to then COVID hit and we were remote learning, and suddenly parents had their kids at home for almost 2 years,
Yeah, this was the teacher strikes that were going on October of 2019, right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, you have to, you know, one of the things that I do when I go to these type of events is that I really, I do a lot of preparation. I'm very OCD when it comes to like technology and equipment, because for me, I'm trying to get rid of the barrier between what I see and what the public gets to see. And the technology is the only thing that's in that way. So I used to have a partner at one of the other organizations that I worked at that would tell me control the controllables, which meant when you go into a situation where there's a lot going on, you eliminate all of the variables. So all of your lenses are cleaned. All the gear you need for that day, you've anticipated for. You show up a day early and look for vantage points, like that shot from above, where that's something I can't do on the fly. I have to literally understand what are the right places to be, where the routes are going, so that I eliminate all the possibilities, and then I can just focus on the humanity, the moment, the expression, making sure that I have a variety of images that helps to tell the story. So detail images, images that show emotion, images that contextualize the day. They're all purposeful. You know, photographers, just like journalists, written journalists, have a language. We don't have words, but we try to create a narrative with our imagery, and we also try to create a story arc, so that when I present these images to my editor, he has enough to be able to transmit a full story and to tell a complete story. And this was actually a month's worth of shooting. So originally I had thought, well, it'd be nice to show one day, but then I started to really think about how this consumed all of our lives. I mean, this event went from being local to very quickly being the national story. I remember waking up one night and watching the evening news, which me and my wife do every night, and it was like we were there. It was like Chicago, schools on strike, you know, and this battle between Lori Lightfoot and the CTU. And so you're trying to capture both sides of the story, you're trying to be fair and balanced, but you're also trying to take people into these experiences and give them a front row seat. These are teachers that were arrested on campus for staging a sit-in. And you know, it's strange too, I have two children, one of them's here tonight, and on one of the marches I actually ran into my kids' teachers, which was so strange. It's like, what is the world come, you know, it's like, and they're waving at me like, hi, take our picture, and I'm like, I'm doing my job, like, can't pick sides here, you know. Sharky at the final press conference.
Yeah, when you talk about controlling the controllables, like, I think that this is like a really good example of that. You know, I think that's like the biggest difference in photojournalism for me, right? As opposed to all the different types of photography, right? Photography is so malleable, it can exist in so many different forms.
Yeah.
Studio photographers, events, documentary, you know, all of these different things. But I think when it comes to photojournalism, and that's why I've like really started gaining so much respect for it ever since I started working in news, is because you don't really have a choice about how things are going to go, right? You can't be like, let's do it tomorrow because it's going to be sunny and
Yeah.
I'll get the shot that I want then, right? You can't. You just have to get the best picture you can when you're sent out somewhere, right? And you have no control over where you're going, what the weather's going to be, any of those things, right?
And every day is unique.
Right.
Every day, every single day. You can be at a championship basketball game and then you're covering, you know, the heroin epidemic the next day. It's just, there's a, I mean, and it's totally, you know, it's helpful. That's why I'm saying, as I was saying earlier, it's so helpful that you take the variables out of the way so that you can really attach yourself to the moment. And what's really cool about these type of events too is I'm sure many of you work in professional fields where if you're in the business long enough, you start to get to know all of the people that work in that space, whether they live in a different state or town. And so photojournalists are very much that way. There may be a few photojournalists here tonight. And so we see each other in the field, you know, and of course, like the exercises, you shoot your tail off all day, you get home, you're exhausted, you send your photos through, and the first thing you do is open up all of the websites of everybody else's work, because you want to know what like the Sun-Times guy got, and what did the Chicago Tribune guy got, and did he get the shot that I was trying to get, and and it's a fun way for us to and also a way for us to encourage each other as a community to continue to do the great work. And sometimes, journalism, because it isn't a take-two thing, it's random. What's great about it is that, everybody gets a little different piece of the story, And so collectively at the end of the day, if you're a good reader and if you digest news in a good way, then I think you look at all of the work and you get to see kind of a better picture of what that moment looked like. This was a really cold day, by the way.
Yeah, looks like it. So we have some images that were from a story that WBEZ did called 50 Lives and 4 Zip Codes. And it was basically some of the investigative reporting that WBEZ did, looking at, I believe it was Little Village, South Shore, Gold Coast, and Streeterville. Those are the 4 neighborhoods, and how were people disproportionately affected. That story ended up going national, and at its core, it was a data story. It was data-driven, right? So these portraits that you got, I want to talk about them because, how I know that there's like a lot of people involved in this reporting, but how do you take numbers, data, and turn it into people? Like, why these people? Like, how did that happen?
Yeah. I mean, this was a great piece of reporting, and I'm always kind of astounded by, things start so small. They're like seeds that we plant. It could be a conversation that we have, or an idea that I share with my editor, and then you start to try to work ways of telling these stories. And I think what's going to be the power of what WBEZ does is that we are now firing on 3 different platforms. We have our digital written reporting, we have our visual reporting, which is encompasses multimedia, so drone photography, video, photos, and then we have the radio component. And for each one of these stories, we're not literally taking the transcription from the audio piece and just turning that into a written story. These reporters are rewriting their stories to work within the confines of the digital platform. So I see this type of work as a way to create a more 3-dimensional aspect to our reporting. And we, as journalists, have to understand that not everybody is going to absorb the way that we tell our stories the same way. Some people prefer visuals, some people prefer a video, or some people prefer to read a longer story that's more data heavy. And so this was the way that we could, that I could contribute to that storytelling process. And so what we had the subjects do, they had just lost a loved one to COVID. And so we asked them to bring something that was from the family member who had lost their lives. And so this is a treatment, we call it Diptych. Essentially, it's like laying 2 images side by side that help to kind of tell a story together. And these stories are really, really hard because these people are in a very difficult moment in their life. And so we're very sensitive to make sure that they feel comfortable sharing their experience and their stories with us. And as a photographer, it's my responsibility to honor them and to honor the story that they're telling. So I will go to stories like this, and I will sometimes sit with someone for 2 hours without a camera. The camera stays in the car, and I will literally just sit with them, and we'll talk. And I share things. During this time period, this was in the middle of the pandemic. We had an election. We had all of what was happening with, George Floyd and all of the protests that were going on that summer, and we had COVID. And it was a lot to digest. And my wife was going through cancer, breast cancer at the time. So there was I felt like my world was this really difficult space to navigate. And even the way that I photographed people had to change, my workflow. I very much use lighting all the time in photography when I do portraits, obviously not when I'm shooting in the field, but I do it in a way I hopefully that is very light and just adds the little bit of light you need to kind of bring the subject up. And in this case, I just literally, for the safety of the subjects and myself, had to go back to shooting all environmental lighting and doing very little production on the front end, just putting them in good light and photographing them. And so that's what you're seeing here. I actually really love this story. And I think portraits are really a different but a very powerful way of sharing the human experience, different from spending a whole day with this person, just taking that sliver, that moment with them. That's her mother's ring, wedding ring, that she brought.
Yeah, I think this story, it definitely made national waves for us in a way that, hadn't often. Yeah. But yeah, it was really these portraits for me, seeing these people that, obviously I'm a visual person, that's how I learn. So to see the faces of people, I don't know, it's powerful, right? In a way that for me personally, writing doesn't always do.
Justine told me one day, she was like, I think your superpower is your vulnerability. And I think I always tell people, for me, journalism is 80% human, the human aspect and the human condition, working with humans and interacting with them. And then 20% of that experience is actually making the pictures. It's not okay to walk into a neighborhood that you don't know, that you have no roots in, and ask for things that are sacred and difficult for people to share. You have to work to build that trust. And if you show up on an assignment and that subject doesn't want you to shoot you that day, doesn't want to be photographed that day, that's what you have to do. You have to respect and honor that and build that trust. And if you do, you will get invited back, and you will be able to access aspects of the community that other people can't. So that's really important to me. I do not believe in parachute journalism. And so many of the aspects of the storytelling that happened that year were people coming in from other cities, CNN, MSNBC, Fox News, and they would fly in for 2 or 3 nights, they would blanket a neighborhood, and then they would leave. And so a lot of times we go into these neighborhoods and there's already a trauma created from these other journalists that weren't really interested in continuing to tell their story, and there was no vested interest in those neighborhoods, And whereas I think with WBEZ, I truly believe that we put a value on building those relationships in those communities.
So let's switch to talking about this little project that you did, because I was really surprised when I saw these images because I was confused. I was like, did we have people come into our offices after they voted? Sorry.
No, we didn't. So one thing that went away during the pandemic from a photo standpoint was studio portraiture. There was a lot less of that we were seeing. And this was early voting. It was, I think it was in Edgewood. And so what we did was, actually Courtney's here tonight and she collaborated with me on this. We decided to head out to one of the polls and to ask people as they were heading in to after they were done voting, come over and give us a few minutes to take a quick picture and ask them a few questions about their experience. We weren't at all interested in their political views necessarily, whether they were voted Republican or Democrat. All that we were really interested in was kind of what I call like time capsule journalism, catching this very unique and selective moment in history. It's like a droplet of sand or whatever, water. So I said, well, if they can't come to the studio, then the next best thing is literally just to take the studio to the people. So you can see this. This is my boss, Jennifer, who's here tonight, took this photograph, so credit to her, of us working in the field. And this is kind of the real deal, kind of the part of the show you don't get to see when you look at the pictures, but it's me and her on the side of a street in front of a polling place, soliciting people to let us take their pictures and tell their stories. And it's amazing what you can do, on the side of a street. I mean, it almost looks like it's in a studio.
Yeah, I was really convinced. I was like, I don't know. I know that obviously you're sent out on assignments, and sometimes you bring your own assignments that you want to shoot, but like, how much leeway do you have for creativity, right? Like, do you feel like you can kind of experiment where you want to, or like, how do you make that space for yourself?
Well, and I think to piggyback on that, I would say yes, I have a ton of ability to be creative. I'm so lucky that my digital team is awesome. We have great journalists on that team that are doing, I think, remarkable things. But I'm very lucky that I get to pitch things, and I don't know if it's because they trust me or they just think I'm crazy and they want to get me off their back, but they let me go and do these things. And I have to be able to make sure that if I'm going to pitch something, that I can bring back something that's really useful. This is in its essence digital first storytelling, visual first storytelling. This is like me saying, I want to shoot a bunch of portraits outside of a polling place. And they're like, oh, that's kind of crazy. Sure, go ahead and try it out. And then we come back with this. And I'll tell you, that afternoon, the reactions that we got, people cried, people were fearful, people were excited. I mean, it was such a wide range of emotion. It was really powerful. And it was a different way to tell that story. Because we get used to seeing, right, like, historically, as as an archivist, like there's kind of a formula for doing election coverage. It's like the ballot box, and blah blah. And so this was a different way to kind of tell that same story, but put a different take on it.
Yeah.
Oh, can I say one thing real quick?
Yeah,
Sorry, I'm a little long-winded. That's Jacqueline Carpenter. She's 78 years old. You can't see it in this picture, but the color version of this, you can see it really clearly. She was so excited to do the interview, and I couldn't understand why until she took off her mask. And she told me that she wears lipstick every single day despite having to wear her mask, because she said you never know when you're going to end up somewhere where you're going to need to look good. And certainly this was her day, right? Like, this was her moment. So she was that's why she's so happy. She even, I think she had, I don't know what you call it, blush or whatever, but she was so excited about this. So it was nice. Journalism doesn't always have to be serious. There is humor in journalism. There is satire in journalism. There's such a wide gamut and range of emotions, and it is incumbent on journalists. We do tend to tell the stuff that's a little bit more dramatic because it tends to be what's on everybody's front page. But I do think that good journalists try to find ways to tell different stories that reach and access different parts of our emotional spectrum. Oh man.
Yeah, well, in politics, that's not necessarily the case, right?
Yep.
This is a photograph of when Ed Burke was indicted. Is that correct?
That's right.
And to me, this reads like this could have been taken in Chicago 100 years ago, right? Can you talk a little bit about what those moments are like when it's like the politician is getting arrested, or there's, I don't know, like a big court case happening, and you're being sent to the same place with a photographer from every outlet in the city. Like, what is that like for you?
Yeah, and I've always, just to start, I've always wanted to ask Ed Burke. I've never gotten a chance to, like, one-on-one, but like, his whole demeanor, the way he carries himself, it's not accidental. Like, he rolled up that day in a black out car, like SUV, and he came out looking like, to me, like a mafia boss from like the 1970s, you know? He's got his fedora, but this is this part of covering media is kind of like the part that none of us like to do, because this photograph takes like 7 hours to make. Like, you literally you wake up that morning, you sit on the side of the street with like 40 other journalists. It's actually the thing that I most like about it is the only time that we get to connect as a group, because we're always getting sent off in different locations. And you don't know when it's going to happen. You're just sitting there. And every black car that rolls by with black tinted windows, it's like freak out session, and then everyone sits down again and says, well, it wasn't him. And so he finally showed up. This is what we call the media gaggle. Like, everybody's really good friends until Ed Burke shows up, and then it's like game on. You know, everyone is trying to get that photograph. And we're not like completely disrespectful to each other, but like, all things fair, like, if the guy behind me wants the shot more than I do, he might push me a little bit to like get in, you know? And I don't always get the best shot. This shot this day was such a unique opportunity because I just fell into the gaggle in the right place. The light hit. I was in kind of dead on, and so it worked out perfectly. So, you know, it's this is another similar image. You've got Rob Laguerovich. He got released. This is you can see there's a giant Rob Laguerovich autographed head in the back of this photo. I mean, he has fans, like Rob Laguerovich super fans. Like, politicians have fans in the city, and I'm not from Chicago, so that, you know, surprised me. But we sat on his lawn for hours, ate together, people were ordering pizzas. Pizzas were getting delivered, and they were eating the pizzas on their car, you know? And then he shows up for 10 minutes, and people go crazy, and you're just hopeful that you're in the right place to make that impactful image, the one that tells the story.
There's also the moments like this that are, you know, like the daily press conferences, right? Like the machine just keeps on turning in some way.
Yeah.
And like, I think a lot of the times when I'm working with like large collections of images, those are the ones that I'm drawn to the most, because it's like the boring stuff, right? But actually there's like, especially like given certain circumstances, obviously COVID, very unique circumstances had to be considered, but like this as an image is so dystopian, right?
Yeah.
And it was just normal daily life at that point, right?
Strange, it's stoic, and like the buildings almost kind of mimic the people in the photograph. This was Memorial Day weekend, and Chief of Police was like the buzzkill. He basically came out to tell everybody, you're not having a good time. We're in COVID. You don't get to party on big boats and not wear masks and all these things. And the value I see in images like this, like you said, is more like the retrospective view of it. This conversation and this evening really came from Justine and I having once a week a 1-hour conversation about photo. And it was totally open-ended. There was no rules. It was just like me and her sitting down. Sometimes we'd talk about my work. Sometimes she would bring me cool stuff that she had found. And we started to build a conversation around pictures and imagery. And I really needed that in this moment in my life. I really needed it. And your perspective historically, like, now, even as I go out into the field, really makes me think about shooting things in a different way.
and cataloging things in a different way, because we do forget. Things become normalized to us. Like she was mentioning lines. There was a period where like we were all in lines all the time. Or, you know, people forget like there were certain items that just you couldn't find. I mean, still to this day it's like that. But it's like, or the masks that you'd find like littered all over the street, you know? And it was just, there were these little cues and symbols that, you know, right now maybe feel so normal, but in 20 years, what are those symbols going to look like to us? And how will we interpret our history and look back at our history? And how will our children, like my 6-year-old that's sitting in the audience, be able to comprehend the experience that we went through? So those images are important for that.
Yeah. So this body of work was, it was a series of pictures that we did to accompany some reporting on survivors of gun violence. The story was called Those Who Did Not Die. And, you know, obviously, especially for a sensitive subject, to have a lot of time to build trust with those people is the ideal circumstance, but that's not always the case, right? It's not just get a shot of this politician, but sometimes get a shot of this person who lost a loved one to gun violence, right? So I wanted to talk a little bit about how you build trust and vulnerability in a short amount of time, right? Like when that's your job, basically. Like how do you do that?
Yeah.
It seems impossible.
Yeah. Well, I think this story was unique because there's a lot of coverage in this city about the gun violence, and particularly gun violence stories based on statistics. This particular story related to people who had experienced gun violence but survived it, and then the trauma that they go through, the rehabilitative process that they go through, and then how they take that experience and put that out into their communities to make those communities a better place. Les Jenkins was shot when he was younger in Chicago, and now is out advocating and helping people, young people, to live a better life. And this is one of the gentlemen that he's kind of mentoring. And I think there's something absolutely so powerful about getting access in a short period of time to tell these stories. I had one day to photograph him. And so this is kind of like a slice of life story, but with the weight of this subject matter that's very challenging and difficult. And so again, this was an experience where we just sat down and talked quite a bit before we started shooting. And I ask permission a lot. I'm also very conscientious about the amount that I tend to shoot on these assignments, and the moments that I choose to shoot. Sometimes if things get too vulnerable, I actually pull back. And I know that I'm sacrificing the possibility of getting something that might be powerful image-wise, but is disrespectful from the standpoint of the subject and what they're sharing with me. So he took me out. We spent a whole day together, and the final image in this series is him standing in the place where he got shot as a teenager.
That's this one?
Yeah.
We also pulled a little bit. I love contact sheets, just traditional analog contact sheets. Obviously, we don't really do that in the same way, but I feel like there's a lot of worth of kind of putting down everything together and taking a look at that. How do you make your selections, right? What does that process look like? I mean, again, we don't have photo editors. It's just you really kind of making all of those decisions.
Yeah. And I honestly often don't know if I always make the right decisions. My formula is really I take an entire take, I do one pass. It's eliminating everything that is, either not usable, overexposed, underexposed, out of focus, whatever it may be. and then my second pass is selects, but in a very kind of wide net thrown out. And that net is literally intended to, like, I may have three very similar images in that selection that help me to understand kind of the direction that things need to be whittled down to. And then there's the third edit, which is the final edit, and that edit will make, those will be my final selects that I'll present to my team and my editors. And I should feel confident at that moment that anything they pick in that group should be able to run. And so this is like what ends up as our like kind of final select, with still some variety to play with, because output is an important part of like the process. You have to know how many pictures are running, how it's going to run. Doing stories in print is different than doing stories online, where you can do a gallery and you can do 20 images if you have really strong stuff, versus print where you have limited real estate and you really have to be thoughtful about, well, we're going to run this one larger and we need a detail to offset the wider shot and so on and so forth.
There's a conversation happening at BEZ a year plus, in the depths of COVID. You know, everyone is so burnt out. All of us are so tired, right? Everyone is so tired. And it's like, how can we had like a lot of conversations amongst the newsroom of, how can we find joy again? How can we demonstrate that? How can we write about that? Like, where does that exist today, right? And I think it was really, those are hard questions for us to answer, but I think this story kind of does do that. Do you want to talk about what this was for you?
Yeah. So I knew that outside of the Black and brown communities here in Chicago that were disproportionately affected by COVID, the senior community was also hit very hard by COVID. And they were actually some of the highest numbers of death in COVID-related deaths were occurring in senior living facilities. So many of them went into lockdown really early on. This is a living facility on the north side called the Admiral. It's a pretty nice space, but they lost everything. I mean, they lost their community, which is why seniors live in spaces like this. They lost their ability to exercise. They lost their ability to, be a part of groups and share. They have a much healthier social life than I do, I realized when I finished this story. They party, they have drink socials, they do all kinds of fun stuff. And it was all taken away from them. And on the latter side of that, they were the first people to get immunized. And so they were also the first ones to kind of experience the first tastes of freedom. And so I wanted, this is again kind of that time capsule style story, I wanted to be there when they got to like regain all of their freedom. And that's what this story was about. And so this was also a story I worked on with Courtney. And it was really fun because I went in and I was like, I'm just going to shoot a bunch of photos and write some extended cut lines and we're done. But then all of these stories started to come out. Like there was this one story about this couple, and they were an older couple in their 80s, and the husband and the wife were separated. The husband was in assisted living because he had some medical issues, and the wife was living in independent living on opposite sides of the building. And the wife was like terrified, every day calling her husband, oh my gosh, is he okay? How can he live without me? His life's gonna fall apart. Who's gonna cut his toenails? Whatever they're due for each other. It turns out the husband was like living his best life. He had those nurses like running around for him, and it was just, you see these little things. So I realized really quickly, all right, we have to find a way to tell this story. We have to do an audio version of this as well, and also something that we can put online. And so Courtney jumped in and did a really fantastic job. This photo is of a son seeing his mother for the first time in 2 years. And she asked him, you know, she had a bit of dementia. She said, why haven't you been around? Like, she didn't even really grasp what the experience had been like. But there's so many small things that when you take things away from people, we don't realize. Exercise, haircuts, you know, there's all of these little parts of their daily lives that were being tended to that even the staff was in fear of working in those spaces. So it was quite a challenge. And then these ladies are awesome. So they have a walking club, and obviously when they cut all group activities or whatever, they could no longer do their walking club, but they were kind of like the rogue ladies in the building, and so they found a backdoor exit, and they would like literally sneak out of the senior living facility to go on these walks together. And that was, you know, I think we all did that, right? At some point, there is something unbelievably, as horrible as all of this has been, I think it's one of the few things in our lives that it touched every human being all over the world. I mean, as humanity, have we ever really experienced something collectively that is so profound, you know? And health is something that, you know, I experienced it with my wife going through cancer. Health and time are the things as you get older that mean more to you than anything else. Money, cars, you know, all those things go away, but time and health. And these women weren't willing to sacrifice the time they had. They had to be together because that's what kept them healthy and happy. And so we all broke a few rules, right? Just to be able to feel human, and that was their way of feeling human. And so this is, again, some of the outtakes from that particular story.
So that's all the deep dives that we'll do, but I think we'll open it up for any questions that anyone has. My colleague Asha is off to the side, and Eddie, so they'll come around and bring a microphone to you guys.
Yeah, if you have a question, raise your hand and we'll come to you.
While he's getting ready, I just also want to take a moment to thank Eddie, Al, Asha, Columbia, and obviously Justine. She's amazing. She preps so well. I was really nervous this whole time that I was under prepping because she just like over preps to the max. And then also just to be thankful to my community of journalists who I consider were frontline workers. You know, one thing about photography is that we could not phone in our work. We had to go to those stories every day. And there was a fear, just like when everyone was locking down, we had to find ways to get out there and do this work. And I'm so proud of our community here in Chicago, the photojournalists out there and the journalists that were risking their health, who had immune compromised people in their homes and were willing to step out and continue to do that hard work. So I just wanted to say that.
Great. Well, thank you both for doing this. This has really been great, and I really love your work. So I do a lot of protest photography, and lately I've been having trouble finding sources, you know, for when those protest rallies and events are occurring. They're the ones that happened at Federal Plaza you know about, but it's the ones in the neighborhood that are kind of hard to find. Yeah. And I'm curious how you or your editors find out about these things and how you then build a story around it.
Yeah, so I would start out by saying Twitter is a big part of the way we find out about a lot of stuff. But also, as I was saying earlier, we really do have, our model isn't quite like Block Club where we literally have like a journalist in each neighborhood. But I mean, we've been here long enough that we kind of have tentacles in that same way in every neighborhood. And so generally speaking, as things start to kind of get moving, word starts to trickle down pretty quickly. We, as a company, in complete transparency, I'm the only staff photographer. So we don't have the ability to do the type of coverage that the Tribune does. They have, I don't know how many photographers, I'd say, I don't know, 9, 10. There might be a contributing photographer in here, they can speak to that. But so we have to be very picky about the type of work that we do. We tend to lean more into, unless it's something that goes really big, like national, like teacher strike, or some of the stuff that was going on, the civil unrest and some of the demonstrations that were going on over the summer, we tend to not, we won't cover everything. Not because we don't want to, but we just don't have the bandwidth to do it. But I would say also, get on your local, there are chat boards and there are spaces where people are organizers are having conversations. There's a varying level of, or degree of transparency as far as how much of that stuff they actually want you to know, as the public to know about, versus what they end up advertising later on is come to our event, Yeah.
Was there a question on the right side of the house? No? Okay.
I
We had
can
another one right
barely
here.
see you. Oh, there's one in the back there. Oh, hi.
Hi, my question is about the photography, your aperture and your shutter speed. I'm a new student in photography, so this is a question I'm curious about. And for you in the protest, the times you were at the protest, or are you keeping it at a certain speed? Are you keeping it at a certain aperture? Are you changing it each situation you encounter? Just curious about that.
Yeah. So I usually show up to those type of events a few hours early, and I do that for a few reasons. One, because I want to dial it, we call it dialing in, just kind of shooting practice stuff that's meaningless, that doesn't take away from our time when the actual event's going on, but it helps you to kind of understand how the light's working that day. In that particular Adam Toledo a gathering, the light was really patchy. There was a lot of trees and it was really patchy and broken up. And so you were getting you were catching pieces of people and things, lots of shadows, lots of highlights. I'm exposing for highlights always, because I don't want that overexposure to kill my photographs. I'm also shooting everything in RAW. And to credit of being someone who learned how to shoot with film, I try to shoot, I'm 90% of the way there when I make a picture. I should only be spending 2 or 3 minutes toning. And some of that comes from just having to work really intense situations where there is no time. But then some of that also is just the fact that it's important to understand your environment so that you can, again, control the controllables, get rid of the technology aspect, and shoot. I shoot everything manual as an aside. I don't do aperture priority or shutter priority, but I know plenty of journalists that do. And I also know plenty of journalists that motor drive everything and then they pick the picture they want, I tend to be a little bit more selective and slow with my process, and I'm also trying to look for variety. I want silhouettes. I want, reflecting images with reflections in them. I want images that take on different looks and perspectives, angles, depths of field. One of the best things my teacher ever told me was, if you have a favorite lens, go to an event and leave it at home. Because what that'll do is it'll teach you to not use that as a crutch to create good imagery. So I would venture to guess that most people, if they're into photojournalism, they love 24-70. It's the wide angle, it's great, you get in there, you can get intimate. Go and shoot a whole protest with a 70-200 or whatever, and see how it changes the way you shoot. And I think you'll find that it's pretty illuminating. It's a good process.
Yeah, and I'd add on to that, obviously everyone has a different style. Different things work for different people, and that's totally fine. I do think when you're shooting manually, you have total control over the aperture and the shutter speed of something. There comes a point where it just becomes like driving a car. You don't think about it. You just stop down a little bit, you make adjustments, and you're not thinking about it, right? So whenever I'm talking with my friends about photography or, whatever those conversations are, it's just I encourage people to have that full control, right?
Yep. And they always say the best camera to have is the one that you have with you. If you buy a fancy camera and you're not using it and it's hanging on a hook in your house, that's probably not a good camera for you. You know, you can own a Leica, that doesn't mean you're a good photographer. You know, I think for me personally, like, shoot low stakes. Bring your camera everywhere, shoot low stakes. Because it's like a bicycle, it's like a car, it's like anything. You can park a car. When you park a car 500 times, you can park that car in the smallest little space and without even thinking about it. And photography is the same way. If you shoot with that camera 1,000,000 times, you get to a point where it just becomes second nature. And then the fun, then you get to really enjoy being a journalist because you can just focus on finding moments, using the light to your advantage, trying to tell different stories, you know, that type of thing. Is there anyone else, Eddie? Oh.
We have time for 2 more questions.
Hello, hello.
Hi.
My name is David. We met earlier, and I love the picture of Ed Burke. If you would have said you were doing like photography for the Batman movie, I would have believed it. But I really love how you do recon. Like you say, you go somewhere 7 hours early so you can just get the feel, because especially like places like protests, anything can happen. So
Yeah.
at least you can have like your points of reference.
Yeah, and you know what? There's something really, there was this thing that our journalist teachers would always, I'm sure they share this with you here at Columbia too, but show up early and stay late. The best pictures happen like right before the event and right after, you know? And so, of course, all of the other stuff, all that other storytelling imagery is really important and critical. But like, I heard this story, I can't remember the photographer's name, but she's like a Nat Geo photographer. She was in a mosque in the Middle East, and she ran out of batteries. And, you know, she was on assignment, and she had like, whatever it was, 3% left. And so you have to keep turning her camera off and turning it back on to make these individual shots. And I just think about things like that, and I think, gosh, you know, I don't ever want to be the guy that gets caught missing an opportunity to create a great photograph because I didn't take the time to charge my batteries or my lens doesn't work. I carry 2 bodies. You know, when I got to and most journalists do, but when I got to WBEZ, they're like, what do you need 2 cameras for? And I'm like, well, what happens if one breaks? And they're like, oh, yeah, that's a good point. And I was like, fair enough. But there's other reasons for that too. You want to carry different focal lengths. You want to experiment with things. If you're out of school and you can check out gear, check out all the gear, not just like a lens. Like check out everything. Use a tilt shift. Go, you know, use prime lenses. Like use ultra wide angles, which are useless in journalism, but they're still fun. Like just go shoot underwater. Who cares? It's all about that factor of getting comfortable with your equipment, so that you can let go of that and just focus on making pictures.
I did appreciate that you said that though, because that was my Gotham picture that like I really liked a lot. So glad you saw it.
What cameras do you have? What bodies do you have?
Yeah, I Canon Mark IVs. I'm trying right now. I have a very unique problem that not very many other photojournalists have, which is that I work with radio people, and they don't like hearing my clicking in the back of all their audio interviews. So with mirrorless now, they've created a feature that makes the camera go completely silent, which like I still love that noise. Like to me, like I don't feel like making pictures feels real if you're just like pressing a button and nothing happens. But in certain situations, like at a funeral or, you know, in a space that's quiet and that you want to not be the center of attention. I mean, I'm so weird that I dress, when I go out into the field, I dress in no labels. I tape all the labels on my camera. I don't have any labels on my clothes. I just don't want anyone, I don't want to draw any attention to myself. I want to completely disappear into the space. And so I always try to kind of take myself as far removed from the situation as possible. So the gear is important, but you should really just use what you like. I've shot Canon for 20 years, so I don't really, I mean, I don't know what it would be like to shoot Nikon or, you know, Sony, but I think they're all the same at this point. Go ahead.
Okay, this is going to be our last question of the evening. Thank you all for coming out. If you want to hang out and chat for a little bit, we'll be sticking around. I'm coming to you, sir.
you were using her pictures, your pictures of the assisted living facility, that you were showing her the pictures of that story. And she comes and tells me, okay, just tell me what he says. And actually what I'm going to tell her is that you were taking care of people. She actually was telling me, like, you didn't want to feature a certain person, and that it was an issue for you, and like she accepted it. And I think that is when you are a photojournalist, I think that is the biggest thing, you know, like, where is the limit with people, you know, like, I think that when you write, of course you're talking about people, but the visuals are so impacting, you know.
Yeah.
It can change a person's life.
Yeah, and you don't always know in these stories, like at Admiral, I don't think Courtney and I knew exactly what we were going to end up with or who we were going to end up covering. You just are kind of trying to tap into that community and trying to find opportunities for good storytelling and stories that drive and help with that narrative that you're trying to create. So we were shifting a lot. Like, I think we could have very easily picked one subject for that story and done kind of a really nice, you know, a picture story on that one particular person. But I think it was more, our hope was more to show kind of the whole community as a whole.
Okay, that is our program for tonight. Thank you all.